Hello, can you hear me? Okay. It is my great honor to speak today. My presentation title is Experiences of Korea on Forest Management from Tradition to Modern Practices. This is the brief content of my talk. First, short background, and second, tradition on Korean forest with feng shui and historical governance of forest resources and community forestry, and then reforestation program, followed by impacts of reforestation program, and finally, conclusions. Okay, first, the background. I think traditional knowledge is indigenous to humanity and acquired over a long period of human interaction with the environment. However, traditional knowledge systems have faded since the global modernization of human societies, but some recently rediscovered traditions have proven themselves to be key components of sustainable development. So South Korean traditions are closely related to forest and the rich experiences of implementing modern forestry system. Basically, Eastern Asian countries have highly relied on rice production, as you understand, and proper management of water resources and nutrients was essential in the region. And then we had a theory of divination based on topography. In other words, villages and rice paddy have harmonized with the forest, field, garden, streams, and other surroundings. As you see on the bottom right figure, all those landscapes are harmonized together. For example, if you have a forest at the backyard, you have a field and garden near the homes and villages, and in front of the villages, usually you have paddy fields. Therefore, water, nutrient, and other resources circulated through forest, rice paddy, and streams in the mountainous landscape, and especially forests were important as source of water and nutrient for paddy field. And then move to the second part, tradition on Korean forest. As I briefly mentioned, that topography philosophy we call feng shui. Ancient Korean forestry was based on the concept of feng shui, which governed socio-economic activities and landscape management. According to this idea, the optimal location for afforestation depended on the location of human settlements. In general, people afforested their entrance and backyard. So in ancient Korea, villagers created Maul Sup, which village forest based on the feng shui concept. The village forests were considered religious and spiritual areas. Sometimes it included the shrines, and local villagers utilized it for livelihood, such as dead organic matter, fodder, and timbers. This is the basic form of landscape managed with the feng shui concept. Again, you see forest land in front of the residential area, also backyard of the human settlements. Village forest provided some fodders and dead organic matter, even some timbers for the villagers. And let me briefly explain the historical governance of forest resources in Korea. Our country has a long history of forestry, and early record of planting have been found. For example, early 200s, record of pine tree planting were found, and some other trees were recommended for planting in late 800s. Moreover, all the laws and policies included the concept of right tree on right side. The meaning of the concept is that tree species for planting should be selected after considering environmental condition of the target area. In Korea, all the laws forced to select the tree species depending on local environmental condition. So based on long history and traditional knowledge, we identify the right species on right environment. In other words, right site. This table shows some records of forest governance by ancient Korean kingdoms. In 3rd century, Pinus dense flora of forestation near the royal tombs and palaces were happened. And in 8th century, other species, including Korean Pinus koreaensis, jubilans, and moros, were planted, something like that. And kingdoms protected Korean red pine forest strongly, setting forbidden forest, enforcing illegal logging, monitoring forest, and controlling pine caterpillars, and so on. Also, kingdoms promoted cooperation with the local villagers. In other words, they encouraged to manage the local forest and also allow the villagers to collect the timber and fuels, and also encourage the participation of local villager groups for forest management. This figure shows the planting of Korean red pine surrounding a royal tomb. At the background, you see the Korean red pine forest surrounding the royal tombs. And also, we well protected Korean red pine, such as more than 400 years of Korean red pine trees in some areas. And also, I'd like to briefly mention the importance of community forestry. Communities near forest play a significant role in realizing sustainable forest management. As you understand, community forestry refers to processes and mechanisms that enable key direct stakeholders in forestry to be part of decision-making in all aspects of forest management. Community forestry regime encompasses participatory conservation, joint forest management, and private ownership. We had a special local forestry cooperative such as Songge, and this Songge is a local forestry cooperative for laborers to collect timber and fuels, and also to prevent illegal monopolies and poaching through participatory activities. And the members of Songge frequently worked with the government, in other words, all the ancient kingdoms. Songge set strict self-regulations to protect the local forest, including penalties and ways of forest management and utilization. And also Songge had a participatory patrol system of fires and pests for local Korean red pine forest. This figure summarizes the duties and benefits of Songge local forestry cooperative. They had duties such as provide labors, fees, and also they did fire patrol and forest watching. Also, they get benefit, including timbers, fuels, compost, and they can put ancestral tomb in the forest nearby. And they had self-regulation, and sometimes they worked with the kingdoms for forest policy, and they shared the forest resources. So these are the duties and benefit of Songye. The key concept of Songye have been adapted in reforestation in recent years as Salimge. Salimge is another name of local forestry cooperative in modern days. Salimge act as a self-governing mutual aid association promoting cooperation between local villagers and forest owners. Members participated in site preparation, tree planting, seed collection, nursery operation, forest management, and area patrols. Economic benefit and technical supports were given to Salimge in reforestation programs. So participation of both government and the local residents were conceptually similar to the traditional way of managing forests, such as local residents' use of a village forest. This is very similar to the duties and benefit of Songye in old days, a little bit modernized and more systematically managed. Let me introduce some reforestation program in Korea. Despite the effort of ancient Korean kingdoms, forests in the Korean peninsula diminished because of poaching, private forest monopoly, and natural disaster. And subsequent to Japanese colonization and the Korean War during the 20th century also destroyed the nation's forest. The South Korean government launched a nationwide reforestation program since 1960s, which is still one of the most successful reforestation activities in the world. Success of this program was considered to be the result of diverse drivers, including the rapid growth of Korean economy, the strong leadership of the Korean government, and the substitution of energy sources. Nonetheless, several practices for this program originated from traditional ecological knowledge and practices inherited from ancient Korean societies. As I briefly introduced, participatory program was very successful during the reforestation program. Also, strong collaboration with the local forestry cooperative was a key driver for successful reforestation. The South Korean government encouraged public participation in reforestation, similar to historical forest governance during the Joseon dynasty, which is a kingdom. The South Korean government specially attempted to gather voluntary crews for reforestation activities to overcome labor shortages. These governmental efforts imposed the responsibilities for the reforestation activity on people across all social areas, including schools, institutions, militaries, and workplaces. These photos shows the participatory reforestation activities during the reforestation program during 1960s and 70s. One notable strategy of the South Korean government was the establishment of Salimge, again local forestry cooperative. This cooperative was responsible for reforestation, forest management and patrol, and forest resource harvesting. Members of Salimge secured food and other incentives while they obtaining technical support from the governments if they attended to the reforestation activity. Salimge markedly contributed to the nation's reforestation program and was a core driver of public participation at the local level. Again, tree species selection was very important during the reforestation program. So the government specified the tree species for the reforestation program on the basis of the climatic zones and site classes of the target sites. And site class indicate the potential level of productivity, which was calculated using topography and soil properties. A site with low site class were revegetated using economically valuable species, whereas site with, fast-growing species, whereas site with low productivity were restored using nitrogen fixing and stress-tolerant species to first improve soil fertility. In other words, we planted economically valuable species on productive site. However, we also planted nitrogen fixing species and stress-tolerant species to low productivity sites. This table shows the plantation species for the National Forestry Restoration Program. On your left-hand side, you see the site class from 1 through 5, and depending on climatic zone, we recommended the specific species for the site class. So high site productivity site, more economically valuable species were recommended. And also we used traditionally protected forest used for research. In other words, traditional ecological knowledge and practices indirectly contributed to adjusting modern techniques in the reforestation program. One remarkable example is Gwangnyeong, a loyal tombs of Joseon Dynasty. During the period of reforestation, the South Korean government used Gwangnyeong experimental forest in the piloting modern forestry techniques. The topic of pilot studies covered the seedling production, tree planting, forest management, and the mechanization of forest practices. In other words, we efficiently used well-protected forest as research sites to develop our own forestry techniques. These photos shows some experiments at the well-protected forest near Gwangnyeong area. Impact of reforestation program. What happened after the reforestation program? First, forest recovered. The mean stand volume per hectare was only 9.6 in 1960s, but it increased to more than 140 in 2015. The unstocked forest land were reduced from 3.3 million hectares to 0.2 million from 1952 to 2007. The reforestation program acted as a basis for the rehabilitation of biodiversity. In other words, after reforestation, plant and animal biodiversity increased sharply. The planted trees also prevented soil erosion and provided organic matter by which forest soils become fertile enough for naturally regenerated vegetation to grow. These photos shows gradual changes in landscape after reforestation program during 1970s through year of 2000. The total carbon stock was 422 TG in 1954, right after the Korean War. However, it increased to more than 900 TG in 2012 because of the restoration of the forest. The restored forest additionally provided ecosystem services such as disaster risk reduction, water yield enhancements, and soil erosion controls, which are beneficial to human society. If all these ecosystem services are expressed in financial terms, in other words, $1 billion per year, the restored forests have served more than 2.8, 1.0, 0.3, and 0.3 between 1971 to 2010 in terms of carbon sequestration, disaster risk reduction, soil erosion control, and water yield enhancement, respectively. In other words, after reforestation, all of those ecosystem services increased dramatically in financial terms. In this figure, we see sharply increasing pattern of carbon sequestration from 1960s to 2010. And also, we had successful experimental forest establishments during the reforestation program. The South Korean government used to restore the land for forest ecosystem research. In particular, they designated several well-conserved areas as experimental forest where extensive research activities were carried out. Experimental forest can be used as sites to assess various forestry techniques and research objectives. Researchers can experiment on forest management alternatives for various purposes using experimental forest, while policymakers can pilot forestry laws and procedures before implementing them on a national scale. One example is a Jeju experimental forest in a small island, Jeju Island. So finally, some conclusions. Experiences regarding sustainable forest management, in other words, traditional and modern community forestry, success of national reforestation, integration of reforestation activity with economic development, and ongoing research and development. These are some experience we had during the reforestation program. And also, I like to stress the importance of community forestry again, and Songge in old days and Sallimge during the modern reforestation days. They belonged to countries' forest policies concerning forest restoration, protection, and utilization. Developing countries have their own traditional knowledge and experiences. Therefore, revisiting it would be useful as cross-border strategy toward the sustainable forest management. So if I suggest some drivers for successful reforestation and sustainable forest management, first driver would be top-down governance. In other words, government provided influences, and also they put the strong regulation to protect the forest after reforestation. And second one would be bottom-up motivation. In other words, we use the traditional knowledge and practices very wisely and use the local forestry cooperative efficiently. And also we had a strong leadership and authorities of the central and local government to implement reforestation program. And also central and local government supported the techniques and financial support to the local villagers to encourage participation of local people for reforestation activities. These are the conclusions that I have. So I have about 15 minutes left for questions. Okay. I guess Dr. Park is
Thank
a
you, Professor
moderator.
Kwon, for such insightful presentation. I would like to now invite Dr. Dongkyun Park once again for moderating the Q&A session. So Dr. Park.
Thank you, Professor Son, for making your presentation in a short time, given just 30 minutes. Very detailed explanation. And I have a question from the Deputy Director General of Ethiopian Environment and Forest Research Institute, Dr. Azina Angelo Tenga. Previously, we received already. So first of all, I would ask this question to Professor Son. The Republic of Korea history tells that the country has reversed the severe deforestation and land degradation by deforestation and afforestation campaigns. Today, Korea is one of the world's climate resilient economies with a forest landscape of more than 64 forest cover. How does this achievement realize? Or was this deforestation effort led by Korea Forest Service? Is it helpful to have forest service in Ethiopia to coordinate billions of tree seedlings plantation and to manage millions of planted areas? Can you answer for these three in short?
Yes, thank you for the very insightful questions. First, I would like to remind you the final slides about drivers for successful reforestation and sustainable forest management. There are some key drivers such as top-down, bottom-up, and strong leadership and authority, and finally some support from the government or something like that. So these are the key drivers to make our program successful. And this successful afforestation program was led by the Korean Forest Service. In 1967, our government established the Korean Forest Service, and they planned the reforestation program and implemented the program. Of course, during the reforestation activities, we heavily relied on other departments such as Ministry of Interior to implement program at local levels. However, in central government, the Korean Forest Service had the key and leading role to implement the program. So I would say that the Korea Forest Service led the successful afforestation program during 1960s and 70s. And the other question was, is it useful to have a forest service in Ethiopia to coordinate the billions of tree seedlings plantation and to manage planted areas? Of course, based on our experiences, Korea Forest Service in Ethiopia would do such a role to plant trees, to manage the natural and plantation forest. So strong leadership and strong power of Forest Service in Ethiopia would achieve such a successful, sustainable forest management in the future, I think.
Thanks.
These are the brief answers.
This will be good enough. And the last one, and Ethiopia moved in the climate resilient green economy, CRGE, path for the last decade. However, it still today faces severe deforestation of its forest lands to other land uses. This situation is serious when sloping terrains are cleared to grow food crops to making living. What do you advise Ethiopian government from Korean experience? How should the millions of planted areas and the remaining natural forests be managed?
Thank you for the very meaningful question again. I think one of successful reforestation program in South Korea is related to economic development during the reforestation program. In other words, during the reforestation program, we had very rapid economic development and switched the fuel source from fuel wood, energy source from fuel wood to fossil fuel. In other words, we did not need to collect fuel wood for energy sources during reforestation program. I totally understand the condition in Ethiopia. However, I would say that not only reforestation program will make the program successful. Combination with other activities, including energy resources or economic development, would be necessary. In other words, reforestation program should be implemented with the other sectors, of course, including energy, economy, so on. And the other point is about artificial forest and natural forest. As you understand, natural forests have high biodiversity and many other advantages compared to artificial plantations. Therefore, we need to have a balance between artificial plantation and natural forest. So we have to consider careful consideration of balance between artificial plantation and natural forest. Based on our reforestation activities, still we think we did not put much emphasis on natural forest during the reforestation. At that time, we put high value on artificial coniferous plantation. However, later we found that the value of natural forest. So now we try to have a balance between artificial plantation and natural forest. So I would say that you need to consider careful balance between artificial plantations and natural forest. That's my short answer to the question.
The Honorable Deputy Director, Dr. Tenga, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I hope you made a good point and Professor Son answered your all 4 questions. But if you have more questions, you can directly ask him right now.
Yeah, I'm very much satisfied by the answer and the presentation itself. Wish to have the slides shared because it's important also other colleagues in the research and the development sector to have this experience of Korea and this afforestation endeavor and also in the climate change mitigation adaptation. So it is important to have the slides, but the answers are well addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then your other questions we will answer later, okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, and the other participant, if you have any other questions. You can leave your questions in the chatting.
Dr. Park, I read one
Oh, yes, you
question
can answer it. Yes, actually. Okay.
from, can I do that now?
Yes, please do that.
Yes. Here is the question. What is the share of the forest sector to GDP in Korea? Do you know how now cover from inland or wood product demand these days? First, forestry sector has less than 1% of GDP in Korea now. And how much wood products supplied by the national domestic forest? Less than 20%. In other words, we are importing more than 80% of wood demand from outside.
So we are heavily depend on the overseas market.
Yes.
Any other questions if you have?
I read one more question here.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for sharing the very interesting experience of restoring degraded landscape in Korea. Can you please talk a little bit about incentives for cooperative members other than food? Actually, one good example is local nursery management. In other words, we encourage the local people to make forest nursery near the village, and government provided the seed for seedlings. And once local people produce seedlings, government purchase them and return them to the local people to plant trees near the village. That was a good incentive for local people, local cooperative members to get income sources from the government while they secure the seedlings to plant trees near the village. So we had similar kind of incentives to encourage local people to plant trees near the village.
Thank you very much. Now it's